We've got a few minutes here before we start, and so it was suggested maybe since there's some new faces here tonight, we go around the room and just introduce ourselves. So in the couple minutes before we go live, I'm just going to go ahead and pass the microphone out. So we'll just let people introduce themselves.
Doug Campbell.
And Mary Campbell.
Kathy Shaner.
We're doing quick introductions.
Sam Welsh.
You have to speak up.
Patty Spitzer.
Melinda Varley.
Tim Knott.
Ann Bittever. Mary Lutz. Mary Barton. Bertha Meesar.
Bruce Melberg.
Ken Rytan.
Arliss Raitan.
Rosemary Thornton. Marion Brooks.
Jack Eager.
Cindy Rutan.
Donald Trump. Dean Cole.
Jennifer Haley.
Mark Penroy.
I can't hear you.
Mark. Bob Boyce.
Hi, I'm Jim Bishop. How are you?
We're good, Jim. We're good. Teresa Pella. Cheryl Moncure. Joanne Pepperell. Maxine Bishop. Barb Beal.
Lana Novak.
Lisa Kalhoff and my daughter Claire Kalhoff, who stepped out of the room.
Barb Hoppy.
Bruce Johnson.
Chris Powers. Rachel Garver. Joe Ellen Polzing. Andrea Foss.
We've got a few more people back here. We've got to get
Chuck Francis.
Barb's with you, I'm sure. She'll be coming in. Okay, did we get everybody? Well, that's pretty good for now. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I'll go back up front because we're about to. I'm Mark Broman. I'll introduce myself in just a second. Where's he going? I'm getting the heck out of here, Dean.
Brown and Mark, we have 4 minutes before the YouTube starts.
Oh, there's still 4 minutes? That clock says 2.
Well, I'm looking at the computer. I'm going digital.
On my Verizon.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'll start the formal introductions here in a matter of the formal kickoff in just a second. But thanks everybody for coming. It's a great turnout tonight. We had about 52 people, I think, 53. So, are you giving me the mic again? Okay.
Yeah.
So we had about 52, 53 people who came for the potluck, so that's a great turnout. We'll do some formal announcements here in a minute. We got a couple things coming up, strategic planning that Teresa will talk about. I'll give some other announcements, but we'll just kill a little bit of time before we start. But again, thank you everyone for bringing the delicious food tonight. It's always fun to have a potluck, to get everybody together. You know, since COVID, not too many potlucks have happened the last few years, so it's kind of nice to see everybody's faces and get the potluck going again. So we talked about maybe having something else again in the fall around Christmas, maybe another potluck. So if you enjoyed tonight, let us know. Let Arliss or I know, and we'll make a mental note of that folks enjoyed it. But we did have a good turnout. We do appreciate everybody coming tonight. Don't forget your pans, your bowls, your spoons, anything you brought when you leave tonight. If you've got something out on the table that needs to be refrigerated, feel free to put it in the refrigerator. Just remember to grab it before you leave tonight. And let's see. In a minute or two. Oh, we got something over here. But yeah, we might as well we'll let Bruce make an announcement about a conference coming up.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How many of you know about the Mantor Lab on the University of Lincoln City campus. A few of you, yeah.
What's it called?
Matter Lab, and it's tied in with Morrill Hall. But it's a laboratory that's part of the parasitology program, which is the largest one of the top 5 largest laboratories in the world. They're having a symposium next week, the 16th through the 18th, and it's open to the public. No admission is required. It will probably be, as we understand, in Morrill Hall, and once you get in the door, they will show you where to go for that. It's a very interesting situation because parasitology deals with pathogens and pandemics and everything. And so this group will be probably discussing bird flu and a lot of things that are relevant to us. But the third day is Thursday the 18th, is devoted specifically to Nebraska and the climate impacts that Nebraska is dealing with and will deal with. And including that, what might be a climate migration destination from the coast, from the heated southwest, as we know well. And if it turns out to be that way, are we ready to welcome climate refugees in the next years? So that third day will be dealing with that. And the idea is that this could be a potential for a rural renaissance of a lot of towns that still have good infrastructure and have opportunities for a real quality of life, but they've been emptying out. And so here we go. Can we think ahead and actually be welcoming that kind of a geographic and demographic shift? Interesting times. So particularly Thursday would be 9 to 3. They're free lunch, I believe, and no registration, but do give us a heads up. If you're interested, I can get you more information.
Well,
Thanks.
It's also online, it's virtual.
It's online and it's virtual, so.
Yes, it is. Yep.
If that works for you, and you want to do it from home, just put your name, your email on here, and we'll get you the information. And we won't do anything else with it. The other thing it is celebrating is Mary Pritchard this is her 100th birthday, and we're celebrating her birthday, and she's the person who got the parasitology lab going to this degree, and so and some of her students are wanting to make it known what she should be thanked for. So as you're going through it, read about Mary. You'll just be amazed. I mean, of course, she was looked over 10 times because, she was a woman, and then she finally made, she made some real difference.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can Audubon put it on their website?
Yeah, we can, Bruce, if you send me something, we'll try to put it on our website and Facebook. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Broman. I'm the Executive Director of the Wachiska Audubon. Wachiska is an independent chapter of the National Audubon with a geographical area covering 17 counties in southeast Nebraska. You can follow us on our website and on Facebook. For those of you at home that are watching or watching this presentation later, we had a great potluck tonight, so you missed out on some great food. So be sure and watch the calendar for the next one so you can come and join us. And thank you, everyone, for bringing the food and the fellowship tonight. That was great seeing everybody. We also still have some of the Vote with Climate in Mind signs at the office. So if you're interested in coming and picking one of those up, they're $10. We have them in the office. I know the election's not for a little while, but things are heating up. And so if you want to get that message out there, I see a lot of those yellow and blue signs around town. So we've got those available. This morning, Tim Knott and I hosted a group of Chinese immigrants out at the Prairie Pines facility. And tomorrow we're going to host a group of Afghanistan immigrants. We were trying to do a reach out to some of the minority populations in our community. And so we started with the Malone Center, and then we started talking to the Asian Community Center. And little did we know there's actually 7 individual groups that they cater to at the Asian Center. And so one of them happens to be the Chinese, one is the Afghans. So again, tomorrow we're going to have them out there. And then on Saturday, we've got a booth out at Prairie Pines for a nature program from 9 to 1. So if you want something to do on Saturday from 9 to 1, they've got a nature day out at Prairie Pines. Today we also had Betsy and Doug Finch. They brought their birds out. They brought a turkey vulture and a peregrine falcon for the folks to see, and they were really happy to see the birds. Of course, the Asian cultures have a lot to do with nature, and so they loved walking around in Waltz Forest out there and seeing the prairie and seeing the community crops farm ground and everything. So we had a really enjoyable time this morning out there, and hopefully we can do the same tomorrow with the Afghan group. Last Saturday, I had a booth out at the Indian Cultural Center, and then 3 weeks before that on Saturday, we had a very successful tour of the wild side. We had over 800 visits to the 7 different sites, and I see many of you in the room were at those sites, and some of you helped man and volunteered at some of those, so thank you for your help. But yeah, we had over 800 visits to those sites, so be sure and watch for that next year. We had a great turnout. I'm going to put a quick plug in for Bluebirds Across Nebraska. They'll be meeting Sunday, August 4th down in Unadilla at the 5th and D Street at the Community Center. They're going to have a potluck at 1 o'clock and an annual meeting at 2. I know a lot of people are members of Bluebirds Across Nebraska and Wachiska. In fact, that's a spin-off group. Friends of Wilderness Park, Betsy's group with the Raptors, Bluebirds Across Nebraska, all those groups spun off of Wachiska, so we're pretty proud to have some of these folks and groups still around that had their beginnings with us. Right now I'm going to introduce our president, Teresa Pella, and she's going to come up and tell you a little bit about some strategic planning that we have going on, and we're going to be sending a survey out tomorrow, so you'll be seeing that come in the mail or in your email. So I'll let Teresa describe it a little bit and get you ready for that, and it's only 10 questions, but with that, Teresa?
10 very important questions, right? Good evening to folks here in the room and those online. First, just to notice, our next board meeting is this coming Tuesday, July 16th, 7 p.m. Zoom. So if you're interested in sitting in on that, you can let Mark or Arliss know and get the link from them. But yes, the most important thing I think that I want to express tonight is we are starting our next 5-year strategic planning process. We did the last one, I think, helped guide the board and the organization through some very, very detailed, very organizational strengthening exercises, like making sure we updated our bylaws, putting some organizational and financial policies in place, hiring an executive director, starting to focus on how we manage our prairies that we own and what to do with conservation easements that we have. And those last 2 are going to be very, very important as we think about where do we want to go, where can we go for the next 5 years, and where should we go. So yeah, 10 questions, and we will have the emails coming out tomorrow, but we're kind of encouraging folks to attend an informational Zoom session that we're going to have on Monday night at 7 p.m. So that link to the Zoom will be included in the email. The link to the survey will also be. But I think you may want to read the attachments in the email before you go to the survey, because there's some very important information, background information related to the questions. We also, I think this may be for the first time ever, we have financial information for the general operating budget and the conservation committee. And then we also have a pie chart in there that shows you kind of where Wachiska's assets are. What do we have? What do we have in the bank? You know, it's kind of like, I'm not sure that we've ever really expressed that and let people know. So that's one of the things that are going to be included in that attachment. So hopefully all of those together can give you enough information that you'll feel comfortable filling out the survey. But yeah, I do encourage you to attend the Zoom Monday night at 7 if you want to put that on your calendar. And if you don't see an email, MailChimp email in the next few days, say by Monday or Tuesday, get in touch with Mark and we'll make sure that you get the information. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. I see also I wanted to thank the landowners who provided their backyards for the backyard wildside tours. We've got a couple of landowners in the audience tonight, so I wanted to thank them for their participation. Let's see, let's take a couple minutes and see if we had any unusual bird sightings here recently. I'll tell you about a call that I got earlier this week. It was kind of unusual. A lady called and said, my parents had 6 parakeets in their backyard at their feeder the last couple of days. She said, who should I call? And I said, well, you can probably call the Capital Humane Society. Maybe one's reporting. I said, I've seen a couple in lost pets where a few parakeets have been lost, budgies, but she had 6 of them. Her parents had 6 budgies in her backyard. So that was quite a sight when they looked in the backyard and saw all that color out there. So anyway, so if you're missing a pet or two, they've joined a rogue flock of parakeets. So watch out for a flock of parakeets flying around the city. So with that, has anyone seen anything unusual, anything fun or exciting the last few days? You have anything out there, Dean?
Well, I'm not about birds, but still about prairie. I just
Okay.
want to highly recommend the folks get out on the road and go out to, travel the sand hills or just head up into Sherman County and Valley County or even go into Custer. I have not ever seen the prairie so beautiful in
So nice and
July
green.
with all of the key rains.
Yeah.
And the cattle, and I'm a vegetarian, but I was impressed with the cattle and the calves, but yet the birds too. I mean, it's just like everything has come alive. So taking you to that Highway 2 route up, or, take stay off the interstate, take 34 and go up into 92. I'm not kidding, it's absolutely good. We went to Callaway down in there, Mark's hometown, but also stop at Broken Bow. They have this special prairie museum that's just right on the outside, and then what they've got, their pollinator garden and everything too, and the birds, and it is well worth it. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Dean, for a minute, I thought you were going to mention the Broman Outhouse at the museum. We do
There's
have,
the Broman Memorial Outhouse.
from our ranch.
I got my picture.
Yeah, you got his picture there. We did.
That's why I showed up.
Yeah, we donated an outhouse from our ranch over there. They built a sod house next to the barn on the west edge of Broken Bow. It is the Scenic Byway Museum, and it's a big red barn that used to be on the other side of town. They moved it there and turned it into a museum, but last summer they built a sod house, and they needed an outhouse, and we had an extra one. So anyway, the Broman Outhouse.
Great places to eat
So-
along there. There's Decatur Brewery or up in Ord. There's a
Lots of
Scratch
places
Down
to go.
Brewery. I mean, it's just, you need to get out. It's just worth the ride.
Yes, and if you get up there, you got the blackneck stilts, and you got the avocets and things like that, the trumpeter swans up in the Sandhill Lakes, a lot of good stuff. Anybody over here? Lana?
My daughter had the last week in June off, so we were doing some of the Nebraska passport stuff. So we went to Red Cloud and did the tour, Willa Catherine tour, but we also went down to the prairie. And at the prairie, it said something about being there at night and seeing the stars. So we didn't have time to do that then, but then Saturday night, we were down at Brownsville and came back and stopped at Deacon and waited until it got really dark and we could see all the stars.
Those prairies are nice to go out on our prairies and be able to see that sky, the Milky Way.
Yeah.
Yep. So Lana's encouraging everyone to go out and check out the skies. They're magnificent at night if you can get a place without a lot of light pollution.
And check out the prairies.
Yep, and see the prairies.
Fireflies will be coming.
Fireflies, that's right. The fireflies are making a comeback. The last few summers, the numbers have been down, but I've seen some studies saying that they're making a little bit of a comeback. Yes, Bruce.
We opted for the silence or the solitude, well, the
The quiet?
serenity of
Okay.
the Methodist Cove on the Republican River Reservoir down there in Harlan County, Alma, and spent our evening on the 4th just birding on the shore. We had dick sissels, catbirds, and yellowthroats,
Okay.
pelicans, green, a great blue heron, an orchard oriole, nuthatches, red-headed red-headed woodpecker, and I'm pretty sure we saw a pair of snow geese. That was really unusual.
Okay. Good. Well, I was down at DeSoto, the old Squaw Creek, now Los Hills. I'm not DeSoto, DeSoto's north. The Los Hills Wildlife Management Area, and there were a couple of bald eagles that have a nest up there. I couldn't see the eaglets, but I could see the parents, bringing food back in. But there were some interesting ducks and still some sandhill cranes hanging around, which really surprised me. They were there this spring when I was down there, but there were a couple still hanging around down at Los Hills. So that was interesting. Anybody else have anything? Yes.
The Nebraska Star Party begins July 28th.
Is that Merritt Reservoir? Yep, the Star Party up at Merritt Reservoir. It's one of the darkest areas in the country. If you look at a map of the United States, and that's one of the darkest areas up around Merritt Reservoir. Yep, that's a great place. If you've never been to the Star Party, or just go up there and at night and see the stars. That's a great place, Merritt Reservoir.
We were just up in the Sandhills over the 4th as well, and we were just blown away by the color, and we went down Brownlee Road. It's the one-lane highway.
Yes, Brownlee Road.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Seeing the western meadowlarks.
And if you get to Merritt Reservoir, you've got to go to the Snake River Falls. It's on private land, but you put $1 in the mailbox and you walk down the trail and see the Snake River Falls is below Merritt Reservoir. So it's on private land owned by the Snake River Falls Fishing Club, but they allow you to go in, put it all in the mailbox and go down to it. You gotta stay in the parking lot, stay on the trail, don't go down to the falls. But anyway, it's beautiful. It's the largest waterfall in Nebraska by volume. Smith Falls has the tallest, but the largest by volume is the Snake River Falls below Merritt. So if you're up there again, be sure and check out Snake River Falls. Lots of wildflowers, yes, with all the rain. Yep. And if people like bobolinks, I saw a couple weeks ago out at Arbor Lake, straight north of Lincoln on North 27th. There's some bobolinks out there around Arbor Lake before you get to Shoemaker Marsh. So just outside of town. So some people really like bobolinks. They're kind of a fun prairie bird to watch. Anything else? Yes, Rosemary.
Well, the Niobrara is a quiet place.
Yes, it just got designated as a quiet park. The Niobrara River got that special designation. It was the first, I think, in the country. Yep. So yeah, if you get a chance, go canoe. Rosemary's got a beautiful house up just about a mile off of the river, so it's a beautiful house overlooking the valley up there. So, yes.
I should have called, I think, when my cockatiel escaped. I accidentally stepped out on the deck with him on my shoulder. The guy was there, and he went right up over the house. He's been out about a month ago, but I'm afraid he's probably still not going. But if anyone has a gray cockatiel, show up at dinner.
Well, I don't know if any of you have heard the news, but there was a white sulfur cockatoo that escaped about a month ago, and they've been chasing it around. And there was a homeless person downtown, had it for a couple days on his shoulder, and they posted a picture on Facebook, and the owner saw it. So the police interviewed the gentleman. He said, "Yeah, I had it for a couple days, and it disappeared." Well, guess where it showed up on the camera at the Capitol? The Peregrine Falcons captured it. And so it met its demise with the Peregrine Falcon. It became a meal, and it was an $8,000 bird. The owner claimed. So that was an $8,000 meal by the Peregrine Falcons. So yeah, I was talking to one of the Game and Parks Commission conservation officers. Yeah, an $8,000 meal. So anyway.
No tip.
So yeah, no tip. You wouldn't want to leave a tip with that. Well, I suppose we better get to business tonight. So it's a reminder, tonight's presentation is available along with the past presentations on YouTube. So if you missed tonight, or you want to watch again, or you've got somebody that wanted to see it, go to YouTube and you can see tonight's and others. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce tonight's speaker, Sarah Browning. If you're a regular watcher of Backyard Farmer, you'll recognize her from the panels. She also works out at the Lancaster Extension Office on Cherry Creek Road in Lincoln, and she writes a weekly gardening column for the Lincoln Journal-Star. So you've probably seen some of her work. And tonight, Sarah's going to talk about what's wrong with my evergreen tree, and I'm sure some other topics. And at the end, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer questions. So, Sarah, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure. Well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to be here with you tonight and talk a little bit about trees. Our trees have had a couple of hard years, the last couple of years with the drought. And it's sad. You drive around in town and look at trees, and some of them are looking pretty rough. So we're going to talk just a little bit about evergreens tonight. I'm going to go through quickly some of the common things that we see that go wrong with evergreens. It seems like at the Extension Office, when people call us, I get a lot of questions about spruces. What's wrong with my spruce tree? I've got, and there are so many different things that can happen. So that's what kind of the impetus for this program tonight is all the questions that I get about spruce trees. So let's look at a few problems, and then I'll leave some time at the end, and we can talk about your problems. If you've got some trees or you've got other things in your landscape going on that are of concern to you right now. Okay, whoops, got to point back there. It's not going for me. Okay, there we go. Okay. Just wanted to start off real quickly. There are several species of spruce that we can grow in Nebraska. Norway spruce, Colorado spruce, Black Hill spruce. Most of them are not native. The only one that is native, or I shouldn't say native, near native, because it's native in Colorado, is Colorado blue spruce, or Colorado spruce. And you can just see here the elevation map or the native range map. What I wanted you to see here and really point out is that the areas where this tree is native are much higher elevation than we are. And they usually grow in kind of gravelly, drier soils. The problem with elevation is that here in Nebraska, we tend to have warmer nights in the summer, and so our nights don't cool down the way that they would if these trees were growing in the mountains. And we have high daytime temperatures, higher than you would have in the mountains where these trees are native, and we have higher humidities. And so the higher night temperatures make trees more susceptible to stresses, and the higher humidity make them more susceptible to needle infections. So that's kind of one of the underlying reasons that we sometimes have trouble with these trees. The other thing is that look at our precipitation that we have in Nebraska. So here on the eastern part of the state, we tend to have somewhere, in normal years, we tend to have somewhere between 30 and 35 inches of rain, okay? If I had a precipitation map up here for Colorado, you would see that they generally would only get 12 to 15 inches of rain in the areas where these trees are native. So oftentimes the problems that we have with spruces and other evergreens in our landscapes have to do with water and how we water them, okay? But just keep in mind that these trees are native to areas that are, oftentimes much drier than what we typically have in eastern Nebraska. Okay. And it's not going for me again, Linda. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to start off with just a couple of abiotic problems. So these are not diseases and they're not insects, but they're really more like environmental or site-specific types of problems. So, and we're going to look at poor site conditions management, overwatering, underwatering, nutrients, and herbicide damage. So that's kind of what we're going to look at quickly here today. So trees that look like this, are not uncommon, and we tend to see, a fair number of those, and, that's not what we're looking for in our landscapes. Linda, it's not there. Okay.
Point it back here.
Okay. So a couple of things that play into the problems that we have with trees actually go all the way back, oftentimes, to when they were planted. And one of the big problems is soil quality. So soil compaction, like we have after a new home is built, is really, really difficult for trees and other plants, because that subsoil that's left after the home is built, and then that subsoil is compacted by all the equipment that runs over it when the home is built. You end up with very, very little pore spaces, and it's very hard for those little roots to push through those pore spaces and to grow. If you think about a soil like this one on the left, you go out there with a shovel and you're trying to plant a shrub or a flower, and you can barely get your trowel in the ground. Well, think about that tree trying to push those roots through the ground. So when we have new construction landscapes or disturbed landscapes, that makes it very difficult for plants to become established. And if a plant doesn't have a good root system, then it becomes much more susceptible to in things like insects and diseases. Okay, so this is an underlying problem. It can kill trees outright, but if it doesn't kill them outright, it can make them more susceptible to other things. Okay, so I want you to look at those two pictures right on the side there. That was a research study that was done by a researcher at Cornell, and what they had done was they came in on a very compacted site, and they did what they call a scoop and dump method. So they scooped up this heavy compacted soil. They were doing this with a backhoe, actually, but you could do it with a shovel. But they dug up this soil, and they lifted up the backhoe, and they let the soil drop. So it was scooping and dumping. And so the soil was falling and just kind of fracturing on the ground, okay? And they did this to this whole site that had been terribly compacted after new construction at the university. And then they planted a landscape into it. And they found that the plants actually did quite well. They also did another study on trees that were already in sight or in place. And they did this soil disruption, this scoop and dump. And they found that after a couple of years, they came back to look at the number of roots in the soil. And they found that just loosening that soil and trying to relieve that compaction had a big impact on how many tree roots there were on those trees. So not even adding any soil amendments or compost or fertilizer or anything like that, but just trying to physically alleviate that compaction can make it much easier for plants to grow in that soil. Okay. A couple of other management issues that we run into pretty commonly. You look at the picture on the left and see the trunk. You look at the sides of the trunk right here. See how the sides of the trunk go straight down into the ground, like the sides of a telephone pole, okay? That is telling us that that tree is planted too deeply, okay? A well-planted tree, the sides should come down, and then you should see that root flare right at the surface of the soil, okay? If a tree was growing from seed in a wild area, you always see that root flare, okay? So a tree like that is too deep. Now, over in the right-hand picture, you can see that a tree that was planted too deeply was dug up to try, it probably was dying, that's why they dug it up, and to look to see how much too deeply had this tree been planted. That surveyor spike, every change in color is an inch. So this tree looks to me like it was planted about 10 to 12 inches too deep in the soil, okay? This is unfortunately a very common happening in our landscapes, okay, for various reasons that have to do with the way we produce trees in the nursery industry. But if you're planting a tree, you always want to make sure you find the first big roots coming off the trunk and plant the tree right at that level, okay? And if you're having somebody plant a tree for you, you want to make sure that they find those first big roots and they make sure they get it planted at the right depth. A tree like that one never develops as good of a root system as a tree planted at the right depth, because the deeper you go in the soil, the less oxygen, and so the less roots to grow. And so a tree like that, what you're going to see it be stunted. It's not going to put out very much growth every year. If it was sitting right next to a well-planted tree, the well-planted tree would take off and it would grow and it would be full and it would look healthy, and this other tree would kind of struggle along and it would put on little bits of growth, and that's what you would see on the top, from the top growth, okay? But unfortunately, planting depth is a huge issue that we run into all the time. Okay. Other planting issues. Girdling roots, roots that press up against the trunk are another common problem we see that have to do with the way we grow trees in the industry. I would like to recommend that people look for trees that are grown in grow bags, which is kind of a it's just a bag that has kind of a felted interior, and when the roots hit that felting, they stop. They don't glance off and grow in a circle. They stop and then they branch behind. So you end up with a root system that's nice and full, but doesn't have all of those circling roots that grow around the inside of a black plastic pot if you bought a tree that way. And trees like that will be much healthier and eliminate this girdling root issue, okay? And then things like this, where someone planted a tree and they left strapping or rope or wire or something around the base of the trunk, which eventually will kill the tree. And this is not uncommon. I get calls from people who say, oh, I've got a tree that's declining over the last couple of years and now it's finally dying. And when they take the tree out, they find something like this. There's something wrapped around the trunk. So again, at planting, it's really, really critical to make sure that all of this stuff gets taken off, so that your tree can live a good long life. Doesn't want to seem to go for it. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so those are some kind of underlying things that can cause problems with how our trees grow and how healthy they might be. Some of the other things that we do that can cause problems for our tree are watering issues, okay? So in this picture, these two trees have both been overwatered. And unfortunately, so what's happening here is that an irrigation system for the lawn is running usually 2 or 3 times a week. And it's running for 15 to 20 minutes each time it runs. And the water is hitting the needles on the tree, okay? And so you can see how it's not as evident on this tree, but see how the tree has thinned out on this side? That's where the irrigation system is hitting the tree, and it's causing needle diseases, and it's causing those needles to fall early, and that side of the tree is thin. In this picture, the whole lower part of this tree is getting hit by irrigation, and it's caused those lower branches to die and not do well. So again, remember where these trees are native. Spruces are native to those mountainous areas and higher elevations, and they don't really want to be wet all the time. They definitely do not want to get water 3 times a week. That's a great way to kill a spruce. So we have to balance our needs for turf grass irrigation and plant irrigation. And we're really trying to steer people toward watering less often for grass, but when you do water, you water really deep, okay? So the rooting depth of turf grasses are generally about 6 inches. And if you're running an irrigation system for 15 or 20 minutes, you may only be putting on enough water to moisten the top inch or two of the soil. What we want you to do is to water really deeply, and then maybe only do that, you know, if we're in the 80s like we have been this week, you might be able to water a fescue lawn twice a month, okay, instead of 3 times a week, okay? Now we're going to be in the 90s plus over the weekend, so you might have to step it up a little bit there. But I think we tend to water too frequently, but we don't water deeply enough, okay? And so if we can balance that out between what the grass needs and what the trees need, then we can keep our trees looking a little bit healthier, okay? Maybe if I come over here, there, okay, okay. So then on the flip side, well, this is still overwatering. What's happened here is the homeowner put a nice ring of grass mulch around the base of that tree and did some good watering. But the tree was really declining. You can see all of that branch dieback in the tree. And what we found when we went and looked at the tree and pulled the grass back is that grass was really holding a lot of water around the base of the tree. You know, grass clippings, when they are used in mulch, in a thicker layer of mulch, it can really hold water in, and it can almost be mat down and really get wet under there. And so it turned out that this tree was getting way too much water. The other one that you see here on the right, what I wanted you to see here is look at how nice that grass looks. So that grass looks really good, okay? But look at this tree, okay? And we've got this dead top at the top of that spruce, okay? There's a couple of things that could cause that, but it was almost certain that this tree was getting way too much water, which was causing it to be susceptible to a disease or insect problem. So that dead top on that spruce is almost certainly either a canker infection or bark beetles. And I'm going to show you some pictures of those here in a second. So here's another situation where we need to find a good balance between how we water our grass and how we water our trees so that we can keep them both healthy. And then there's easy ways to do that and still have a nice looking lawn like that one. Okay. Whoops. Okay. But this is what we've seen more of in the last couple of years. With the severe drought conditions that we had, you know, it can get way too dry, even for spruces that like dry conditions. You know, when I was in junior high and in biology and learning about plants initially, they were teaching us back then that the roots of trees are as deep as the tree is tall, okay? So we know now with current research that there are some anchoring roots that go down really deeply, but 90% of a tree's water-absorbing roots are in the top 24 inches of the soil, okay? So if that top 24 inches is dry, then the tree really has nowhere to pull water from. It's not going to pull water from deeper layers of the soil because those deep roots are anchoring roots. They're not water-absorbing roots, okay? So with the last 2 years of drought, a lot of our trees have really suffered. And in drought situations, what happens with trees is if the soil gets too dry, then the roots start to die. The roots are dying back, okay? And then what we see on the top is we see this kind of thing. So it's really kind of interesting with spruces when they start to suffer from drought stress. You'll see this strange kind of pinkish coloration to the needles as the needles are dying, okay? And you can see that in both of these pictures here. And then what'll happen is those needles will fall, and then usually the whole twig will die. So you'll end up with, you know, these dead twigs at the ends, and then if it's bad enough, you'll get entire branches that will die, and it just progresses from there. So even though these trees are native to drier areas, we can have situations where it's way too dry for them, even here in Nebraska. And that's when they need some good deep watering. Okay. And then here we see some drought effects on yews. And yeah, so we've seen a lot of damage to them over the last couple years too. Okay. So let me show you a couple of diseases then that we also see in some of our evergreens. And like I said, when a tree is stressed by underlying conditions like planting depth or drought or overwatering, they become much more susceptible to some of these underlying problems. So there is a needle disease that we see quite often in spruce called Rhizosphaera. And if you want to look for it and try to diagnose it yourself, all you have to do is look at the needles that are changing color and look for these little black structures that are growing out of the stoma on the needles. Those are actually the fungus that is killing the needles. This is a controllable problem. I mean, it's something that you can control with fungicides. But here again, in this situation, it could be that this tree was being hit by irrigation every 2 or 3 days as the turf was being watered. And all of that wetness on the needle surface is what encouraged that fungus to grow. So if we were able to redirect those heads so that the tree wasn't getting hit so much, that might also help to manage the disease as well. Okay? So Rhizosphaera, what we see is it affects the older needles, the needles on the inner part of the branch. And so when you have a tree that is infected with Rhizosphaera, it starts to look thin because all you'll have left will be the new growth at the tips of the branches, and everything that, all of the needles older than that have died. So typically spruces will hold on to anywhere between 5 and 7 years of needles. And so on a nice full tree, you can actually count back all the years of needles that are holding on. But when you have something like Rhizosphaera, you lose those older needles, and so the tree starts to look really thin. Okay. Then we also have a somewhat of a similar disease that affects pines, and we see this a lot on our longer needle pines like Austrian and ponderosa. And this one is called Dothostroma. It is also a needle disease and causes early needle drop. And so it can result in what you're seeing here on the right, where you have a tree that just looks really thin. It just is not full the way that it should be. But if you look really closely at the needles, what you'll see is there'll be a brown spot on the needle. And then from that brown spot, everything out from that point will die. Okay, and that's Dothostroma. It's very, very, very common. But again, this one can be controlled with fungicides. So if you start to see signs of this disease on a tree, there are ways to manage it. And typically Dothostroma doesn't kill trees. It just makes them look, kind of straggly and thin. Okay. Now, this is one that is a little more serious. And I showed you that picture a few minutes ago of that spruce that was being overwatered that had that dead top. Okay. This is one of the problems that could have caused that dead top. A canker is usually it's fungal, a fungal infection of the bark, and it kills the bark. Okay. And cankers are usually, we consider them to be weak pathogens. So if a tree is really healthy and vigorous, then they don't have trouble with cankers. But if a tree has some underlying stress from those early things we talked about, or from overwatering or underwatering, then it becomes more prone and more easily infected by cankers. Okay? So this particular canker, Cytospora, we see a lot in evergreens. And if you look really closely, you can see the infected area of bark right here that has died. And we see these cracks around the edges of the canker. As the bark that is still alive is growing, it pulls the bark apart. And so you see cankers along the edges of the dead section. Okay? And with this particular canker, trees often weep a lot of sap. So from the edges of the canker, you'll see these streaks of dried white sap that are running down the trunk of the tree. Okay? And if the canker is able to girdle the trunk, and it goes all the way around the trunk, then everything from that point up will die, like that earlier picture I showed you. Okay? So cankers can occur on the trunk, but they can also occur on the branches, on the smaller secondary branches. They can occur pretty much anywhere in a tree. Okay? The bad thing about cankers is that there's really no fungicidal control. You can't spray a tree and get rid of the cankers or protect it from cankers. The only thing you can do is try to make the tree more vigorous and more healthy so that it can wall off the cankers and prevent them from spreading, or prevent additional infections. Okay? So at this point, there's really nothing we can do about this one, because this section of trunk, We can't do anything there. But when they happen on secondary branches, you can prune out the dead section and just remove the canker. But you know, the longer term control is trying to figuring out, okay, why was the tree susceptible to canker infection, and then addressing that. Okay. And here in this picture, you can see this is the cankered section right here. And it's starting to, it'll crack soon around the edges, and it'll start to leak a lot of sap. Okay. So you can look for those in your trees. Here are just a bunch of different trees that have been infected by cankers. And you can see that it does attack the tree pretty much anywhere. You know, side branches, top leader, main trunk. But all of these branches have been killed by canker infections. Okay. Okay. Now, but there are what we call tip blights too, which usually just affect the new growth. You know, so the new growth that's coming out every year. And there are tip blights that affect things like junipers and arborvitae and yews. There's also tip blights that affect pines. Okay, the diploidea tip blight is one that we see really commonly every year, again in some of our longer needled pines. And what happens is the fungus infects the new shoot. See, here's a new little shoot that was just coming out in spring that was infected by the fungus, and so that new little shoot died. Here's another one that has died. Okay. In really, really bad years, when the weather conditions are very favorable for these types of diseases, the fungus will stay active, and it can actually kill entire branches, which is what it's done in these ponderosa pines. Okay? But again, these diseases can be controlled with fungicides, or you can prune out the dead branches, the dead tips, that type of thing. So these are controllable, not quite as serious as the canker diseases. Okay, I have just a couple insects I'll show you some pictures of, and then we'll stop and we'll get your questions about what's going on in your trees. Okay? So, bagworms. Are you all familiar with bagworms? Okay. Yeah. So we see the worst damage that bagworms cause is on evergreens, because evergreens, unlike deciduous trees, don't have the ability to replace needles that are chewed or eaten or lost. You know, when those needles are gone, they're gone. And if a branch has no needles on it, then it's going to die. You know, it won't stay alive and regenerate needles. So here we have a spruce that had a really severe bagworm infestation. It had gone on for several years and had, you know, without being noticed or treated. And so we had pretty significant branch dieback on that tree. Here's what they look like. Here's what they look like when they're just hatched out. They're really, really tiny. You know, they're less than 1/4 of an inch long, but they start feeding immediately on the foliage, and whatever it is they're feeding on, they take little bits of it, and they start to build this cone, this bag that they carry around with them that is their protection, so that it protects them from birds and other predators. And so what you're seeing here, you can kind of see right here, this little guy has got his head stuck out, and he's feeding on those needles of that juniper right there. But when they get to be mature, the bags will be, you know, somewhere between 1 inch and 1.5 inches long. Okay. What you're seeing over here, this is a female's bag, and this is the female right here, and she's mating with this male. So the adults are moths, and the male moths fly around and fertilize the eggs, and then the female, she'll go back in that bag and she'll lay her eggs in that bag, and then she'll die. But there could be anywhere from 300 to 500 eggs in that bag. So if you have small plants in your landscape where you're having problems with bagworms, in the wintertime, a great way to control them is just to pick the bags off, because you can get rid of a lot of the eggs that way. But don't just throw them on the ground, because if you throw them on the ground, the eggs are going to hatch and they're going to crawl right back up on your tree. Okay? So crush them, burn them, put them out with the trash, whatever you want to do. Okay? We've seen bagworms on all sorts of plants. I've seen them on roses. We've seen them in alfalfa. We've seen them on hosta. And they get on all sorts of deciduous trees. But again, because our deciduous trees put out a new crop of leaves every year, the bagworms are not really a big problem. It's mostly the evergreens where they really cause the most damage. Okay. And so here's a guy that's just about ready, guy or gal, I don't know which one, but she's just about ready to mature. And see, putting out some fibers and attaching that bag to the stem, and then that insect is going to go back down into that bag and pupate into either a female or a male. And those little bags will stay attached. You know, even after the insect is gone or dead, those bags will stay attached. They don't ever fall off. And that also happens if you spray a plant that has bagworms with an insecticide. Before they die, the insects usually attach the bag to the stem, and then they go back in their bag and they die. So if you don't use the bags falling off as a sign of whether or not your spray was effective or not, because you'll be disappointed. Okay, this is the last one, bark beetles. So bark beetles, sometimes we call them shot hole borers because when the adult insects leave the tree, they leave behind tiny little holes that looks like BB shots. So if you're looking at the trunk of an evergreen and you're seeing all these really clean little BB shot holes, it could be bark beetles. Okay, and bark beetles are a beetle. The larva is a little caterpillar that tunnels underneath the bark, and you can see the galleries here where the bark beetles have all been moving and feeding in the xylem. And they basically kill the water absorbing or the water moving tissues in the xylem, and that's how they do their damage, and that's how they can kill plants. And then what you're seeing here is the frass left behind as adults were getting ready to leave the tree. Okay, so again, bark beetles are usually not a real problem on very, very healthy trees, but if a tree is stressed by other things like drought or overwatering or some of those planting issues, then we could see bark beetles coming in and causing problems. Okay. Oh, there we go. Just another picture. Just to show you the size, how big the adult beetles are. They're really, really small. Okay, here you see a little guy sticking his head out, getting ready to come out of the tree. And again, a spruce where the top has been killed by feeding of the bark beetles under the bark. Okay. So what do? You've got a tree that's not doing well. How do you figure out, which, if any, of these problems that we've talked about could be the problem with your tree? Well, that's one of the things that we're there to help you with at the Extension Office. You can always bring us a sample of a branch, or you can take some pictures of the tree and you can bring them to us, and we can try to help you figure out what might be the problem and figure out a good management plan. Because it can be hard. It can be really hard to try to figure out what's wrong when a tree is not doing well. So if you need help with trees, and we're always available to help you at the Extension Office. Okay. We do have some good publications on some of these diseases and insect issues too, and I brought a few of them with me tonight. So if you have, I have the diseases and insects of evergreens, and I also have the diseases and insects of broadleaf trees. So if there's anything there that might be interesting to you that you think you might want to have as a reference, I can give you one of those brochures. Or you can go to our link, go.unl.edu/spruce, and you'll find all of those links to all of those publications on that webpage, okay, along with a lot of other great information too, like information on the bagworms and the Diplodia tip blight and pine wilt and some of the other things that we're dealing with right now as well. So it can be a little complicated, especially with trees, to figure out what's going on, but I think we need to pay attention to some of these underlying issues like soil quality and planting depth, girdling roots, things like that. But then also watering is a big issue. We have a program that we're doing right now called Water Dogs, and it's all about trying to figure out how to water well to have a nice, healthy lawn and to also keep your landscape plants healthy. And we're going to have 3 sessions at the Extension Office coming up in August. If you want to visit our lancaster.unl.edu website, you can find the link to those programs. You would all be welcome to come if you want to learn a little bit more about how to water, to keep all of your plants healthy in your landscape and maybe save a few dollars as well. So you're very welcome to come to those. So if you have any questions about what I've talked about, I'd be happy to answer those for you. Otherwise, if you have questions from your own landscapes, I would certainly be happy to talk about those too.
we'll use a microphone so they can get the question
Okay.
at home. So here we've got our very own backyard farmer session, so.
Okay, so over the years, I've used a 3-foot watering prong for the trees. And I don't do that anymore because they said that especially if you plunge that all the way in, you're bypassing the roots that uptake the water. True?
True, yes.
So you should just use, I don't have an underground sprinkling system, so I should just use my sprinkler.
Just use regular sprinklers and water from the top of the soil down, yeah.
And then I can give those to my neighbor that I don't care for.
Yeah. And when you watering for trees, the other technique that some people like to do a lot is they'll take a hose out and they'll lay it at the base of the trunk and they'll let it run for a while. Well, actually that doesn't work so well either, because you're missing about 95% of the root system. When we water for trees, we want to focus on the area from the trunk to the edge of the widest branch, we call the drip line, all the way around the tree. At a minimum, you need to water that whole area, okay? But when you water for trees, you don't water very often. If temperatures are 80 or below, you may water once a month if we're not getting any rain. If we're getting a couple of inches of rain in a month, then you probably don't need to water your trees. So we water really deep, but we do it very infrequently for trees. Okay.
One thing you didn't mention about is mulching. And I see how some landscapers are mulching right up against the bark. And another thing is, I noticed one of the churches is irrigating, and they're letting the water hit right up against the tree's bark. So what is the answer to tell them about that?
So mulching can be really beneficial for trees because there is research that shows that trees grow much, much better under mulch than they grow under grass, because turf grass is actually quite competitive where its root system is located. In fact, you can have almost 50% more roots under mulch than you do under grass. But you have to do the mulch right. So you drive around and look at commercial landscapes and you see where they've mulched in like a little volcano around the base of the tree and they've piled the mulch up against the trunk. We don't want to do that because that holds moisture against the bark and it makes it likely that you could get bark rots that could start in the bark. Plus it also provides a really excellent place for voles to get in there and start chewing on the bark and you can't see it, okay? So what we want you to do is about a 3-inch layer of mulch in a flat pancake, really flat, and as wide as you're willing to go. The wider, the better it will be for the tree, okay? But a flat 3-inch layer is what we want, okay? And as far as the irrigation, ideally we'd love it if those irrigation streams did not hit the trunks. So if there's any adjustment that can be done to try to prevent that, it's better for the tree. Sometimes it's not possible, but in the best situation, you wouldn't let that happen.
You don't want the mulch up against the bark either.
Yeah, if you can pull it back even just an inch so that it's not actually touching the bark, it's better for the tree. Okay.
More questions?
Questions?
Back there.
Right behind you, there's a mic.
How often would you water in the wintertime in a Nebraska winter where we get these, we have these cold spells, but then we might have a week of relatively above freezing temperatures? Would you, if we don't have a lot of snow, would you water in the wintertime?
So yeah, winter dry conditions are a real problem for us, especially in the last few years. We haven't been having much snow. But what we would tell you is make sure that your trees are really well hydrated in the fall. So, up until November, what we're looking at are soil temperatures. Once soil temperatures drop below 40 degrees, the roots are pretty much dormant and they're not really active and they're not going to be taking up much water. So watering in the middle of the winter, December, January, when soil temperatures may be in the 30s or the 20s, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of water uptake. So we would say get your trees really well hydrated in the fall. If we do have periods in the winter where the soil is not frozen and it's getting fairly warm, then you could potentially water then too. But fall watering is probably more critical.
Okay, so now we know we should not be using grass to mulch trees, but what materials should we be using?
You know, you can use grass. If you let it dry out first before you put it on, it tends to stay fluffier and it doesn't mat down as much. So I don't want to say that you can never use grass. But you know, wood chips, I like to use just contractor wood chips. Actually, I go to the free pile that's over by the Fleming Fields. I just pick up contractor mulch, and that's what I use in my landscape. But whatever you like the look of, you know, bark chips, cocoa bean hulls, I mean, anything organic is great. And don't put any landscape fabric underneath it, because you want that material to break down. You want that organic matter to go back into the soil. So anything organic is fine. Pardon? No rocks. Yeah, no, rocks are not great for plants. Yeah.
Back to this watering, it can get confusing too. Now,
Yeah.
I'm talking hardwoods though too. Young trees, what I've been told too, they're like 4 inches, 4 foot high. The first 2 years is real critical in the watering of that, and I understand that. And of course, with the temperature, varies if you should do it once a week or, and they say 5 gallons and all that good stuff. But where I'm confused though, when the big stuff gets going out there, when I talk a tree that's 50 years old, you're saying also that we still should water that tree maybe once, twice a week, maybe when it's real dry. I mean, the big stuff, where's there a limit too?
So when we're having years of normal precipitation, you probably don't need to water those trees much at all, okay? But if we are in drought, like we were the last couple of years, I'm losing my microphone. If we are in drought, then yes, we would have you consider watering even the big ones, because they have a restricted area from which they can pull water, and if there's nothing there, then they're going to suffer. So if we have, 2 months or so, 6 to 8 weeks of no rain at all with higher temperatures, then it's probably an idea to start thinking about watering your trees.
But the other safe thing too, with the young trees, after 2 years, they're pretty much on their own if you have kind of an average rain. Because again, you got to worry about overwatering too, or care too for them.
Right.
One last question too on that stupid question, but yet we worry about the evergreens and if they're native to here or not. But we've got the infestation of cedars. Has there been any research done too on doing a hybrid cedar or something too that can be green? I mean, that's bizarre, but yet something that is beneficial. Is there anything being done? And would you like to address the cedar thing too? That's crazy out here what's happening.
So there actually a fair amount of work being done to try to figure out how to utilize weedy cedars, in various biomass applications where they can be harvested and chipped up and then used in some way. It's kind of a double-edged sword with cedars because they're so tough and they're so hardy. Our list of evergreens that grows well in Nebraska is getting pretty short. And so it's kind of hard to knock that one off the list, even though it is invasive. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But I mean, the Nebraska Forest Service is doing research on biochar and using cedars for biochar, as a soil amendment and various other ways that we can utilize cedars and try to manage some of those that have gotten out of hand. But
some of our old cemeteries started with cedars.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I just have a question about the loss of the limbs on a lower tree, on a spruce. What do you do if it has been overwatered and you've lost some of the lower branches? Should you cut those off?
So if the branches are dead, then yeah, you might as well cut them off because they're not going to regenerate or resprout. If the tree is relatively young and you've lost some of the lower branches, then I wouldn't worry about it too much, because as that tree grows and those upper branches grow, they're going to droop down. And eventually they're going to cover that area where those branches have been lost. Even in an older tree, it's not a horrible thing if you have a little bit of branch loss at the base. So this is just a personal preference. I like to see evergreens limbed all the way to the ground. I dislike it when people trim their evergreens up and try to make them look like deciduous trees. It's just not the way they're supposed to grow. But it won't kill them. I mean, even if you lose those branches from a disease or drought or what have you, the trees can still go on and live a long time, even if they have lost those lower branches. Okay? And one other thing, I'm kind of reaching the end of my time, and I know there's a prairie show on tonight that some people wanted to get to. We have 2 years of extreme drought. We've had a lot of root dieback on our trees, and a lot of xylem has stopped functioning, the water-moving vessels in the tree. After the drought ends, the tree has to regrow those roots. It has to regrow that xylem, and so it can take a long time for trees to fully recover from drought, sometimes up to 3 to 5 years. So just because this year we're having pretty good rain so far this year, it doesn't mean that our trees are fully recovered. They're going to take a few more years before they get back to the vigorous health that they were before the drought. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay.
Got a couple old pin oaks, 50 years or so old, and not much sun. So a lot of my flowers are under the trees and stuff. And I water flowers, but I always wonder if I'm really even giving the trees enough. When they were young, you couldn't even see through the branches, you know, and now, and we've had these winds, and so there's a lot of dry branches that fall, so it makes me wonder sometimes.
Yeah. So the question is, are the trees too old, and should you let them go, or?
No, I've had a guy came and trimmed and said I could have it for another 50 years, and I was like, really?
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering about is the watering, because I water the flowers, but I don't think that much about the tree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you might just want to do some additional watering in that larger area from that trunk to the drip line with that good deep soaking for the tree itself. I mean, it's pulling up some of the water that you're applying for the flowers, but it's probably not getting enough water from that since this is a really big tree. So I would try to water a larger area underneath that drip line.
But you said not soaking it so much?
No, when we water for trees, we want to water and try to get that water to go down about 10 to 12 inches.
So let the hose run.
Or set up a sprinkler is what I usually recommend, because a sprinkler will cover a larger area of ground. And what I do with my trees at home is I'll set the sprinkler up in one location and I'll let it run for 45 minutes to an hour. Then I'll move it as many times as I need to cover the whole root system of the tree. It won't be horrible for the bark if you get it wet. It's just like a rainstorm. Okay? And especially since you're not doing it 3 times a week. Okay?
When we get rain and we don't really get that much, is that still good for the trees? Because they're collecting as much, you know, they're collecting.
Any rain we get is helpful for the trees. And it's nice when it comes slow so that it can really soak in deep, although sometimes it doesn't happen that way.
I'm sure Sarah would stick around for a little bit if you have some additional questions, but we'll wrap it up now. And let's thank Sarah for coming tonight.
Thank you again. It was very nice to be with you here tonight.
And don't forget your bowls.
Came out today, and we are now out of the drought in the Lincoln area, and it's the first time in 4 years.
Right.
Okay, so we're out of the drought. So there you go. Yep, for now. Yep.
You go next year, we start.
So don't forget to pick up your dishes, your bowls, your plates, anything you've got out there. Thanks again for coming tonight. I just got a notice for the football fans. Monty Kiffin passed away a little bit ago today. Monty Kiffin's from Lexington. My mother dated him in high school, so I have a strong connection to Monty Kiffin. Him and Mick Tinglehoff were classmates of my mother's. So yeah, so Monty just passed away today, and Mick died a few years ago. So anyway.